you're just never going to care as much about somebody else's dream as your own. We, being me and my brother, built an app called Riz.ai.
When's the right time to leave a job for your startup?
So the first time, it really came down to opportunity cost. And it felt like, especially as a first-time founder, you can't really learn all the lessons until you're fully immersed in your startup. So as I've gotten older, I've realized that startups are not that complicated.
Welcome to Those Who Build, a podcast focused on listening to some of the best startup founders that I know, where we learn from their insights and their mistakes. In each episode, we'll speak to one founder and hear about one key experience or one key learning that they may have had. In this episode, we speak with Jack. Jack is an excellent second-time founder that I met whilst being out in San Francisco for a month. Now we hear how Jack made the decision to quit his first job and go on a journey of starting a startup. He's now successfully working for his own startup again and doing super well. We'll learn when it's right to quit your job to start a startup and also when it may not be right to do that. So, if you're in this situation where you're considering starting your own company, where you are running your own company on the side of your job, listen along and let's hear all of Jack's wisdom. Hey Jack, how are you, man?
I'm doing well, man. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm awesome. So what are you building and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. So right now I'm building an app called Gabber. Gabber is a really easy way to spin up sort of like voice-to-voice AI companion apps. So why am I building this? It's kind of a weird esoteric thing. 8 months ago, very early 2024, this is kind of when LLMs were really popping. This was like GPT-4, Claude 3 comes out. And you're starting to see like character AI really blowing up. So there were all these sort of like AI companions, but they were all text-based. We wanted to try something a little bit different. So we had a friend starting a dating coaching business. And as this thing was sort of taken off, he asked us if we could just build some way for his clients to go on like practice dates. So we being me and my brother, built an app called Riz.ai. So there are like 6 Riz AIs. We were the one where you could go on dates with AI girls and like practice your Riz. And we were like, I think we were probably the first, or maybe like the first 3 sort of voice-to-voice apps of this kind. My brother works at a company called LiveKit, and essentially what they do is make it so you can send media across the internet really quickly. OpenAI actually uses their tech for this exact, voice-to-voice AI use case. So you're like, okay, my brother's one of like the 3 engineers in the world who have ever built something like this. We've got this Riz AI product. Launch went pretty well. It was fun. It was like, we had a viral moment where we were like featured on some pretty big podcasts, and that was really cool. But we got a lot of requests from kind of other apps in the space, whether those are AI girlfriends, these AI toy apps, some more adult, properly adult use cases. They all wanted our tech, but for their use case. And that's where Gabber was born. Essentially, it was, okay, we'll spin out the back end so anybody can build, an app either for themselves, if they just want to like practice studying, they could spin up something on Gabber really quickly. Or if they want to make an app that, millions of people use, they can plug in Gabber as the sort of like AI backend for their companion app.
That is awesome. That sounds like a journey and a half. Have you,
Yeah.
I got one question though. Have you been on any AI dates yourself?
Well, I'll say there was a 2-month period where I was going on probably 20 a day. Oh my God, dude. It was a ride. Like truly, because we don't use OpenAI and Claude anymore, but we started with those. But you have to be really clever about kind of how you prompt those, because obviously they have moderation. They don't want you talking about things that are inappropriate or whatever it may be. So there was like a solid 2-month stretch in my living room where I'd like come home from my day job. Like I was working a seed stage growth job. It was like not an easy job. Come home at like 6:30, and I'd sit in my living room for like 3 hours trying to get OpenAI to go on a date with me. Like it was a ridiculous, oh my God, it was such a ride. But yeah, I mean, I could say my Riz got pretty good in those 2 months.
Good. Well, next time in SF, you'll be my wingman then.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. So you mentioned you were working a job before. Are you still
Yep.
working that job now, or is this full time? What's the situation?
Yeah, so we're full time right now. Kind of a funny story there. I'll keep it short winded, but was working this job, was kind of starting this company on the side, and had plans to quit my job. I'd done this before. This is my second company I've started, and that decision is never easy. Like last time, I can for sure say I quit my job too early. We had an MVP, but we didn't really have users, and I think that's we can maybe get into that later, but that was too early. This time we had users that were paying us. We had a product that was working. And so the plan was probably November-ish, I would quit my job. And I actually, this is an interesting wrinkle in the story. I knew I was going to quit my job. So my brother and I had started looking at buying a duplex. We were like, oh, we want to live, in the same building together, but not be paying rent. So we devised this plan. We would buy the house. And then in November, we would quit our jobs. Literally the day after we closed on the house, no, the day up, we closed on the house at 11. At 12:30 p.m., the CEO of the company I'm working at, this is August, he goes, hey, we're shutting the company down, letting everybody go. So I was like, okay, we're going to fast forward my timeline 2 months, which, anyone with a mortgage knows that mortgages are stressful. So, yeah, I'm full-time. Not by choice. I think I would have been full-time 2 weeks from now by choice. But yeah, we're all in.
That's awesome though. And the fact that you had something lined up is really great. There might be a lot of people in that situation. I have no idea what they're going to do next.
Yeah.
Obviously you've had two situations there. One where you chose to leave the job, and then one where you've obviously left the job for other reasons. When's the right time to leave a job for your startup?
Yep, that's a great question. So I've obviously done this twice now, and then I can talk about my brother as well, who, obviously isn't unemployed right now, but is obviously going to be joining me very soon. So the first time, it really came down to opportunity cost. We had been building a company for probably 6 months. We'd raised, a small pre-seed round, and it felt like, especially as a first-time founder, you can't really learn all the lessons until you're fully immersed in your startup. And that honestly, I had some intuition around that. I was sort of in this mode where I was obsessed with my brokerage account, my net worth. So that was kind of keeping me at the job. But I had this intuition that I'm leaving something on the table. The startup, why go 50% in on something? Because it's just like most things in life, if you go 50% in on them, they don't really pan out the way they could. So that was really what happened. It was just like, okay, my brother had already quit his job. I felt like we needed more horsepower on the team to really give it a shot. And I felt like, okay, if I was going to be a person who commits to working on startups, I need to commit to working on a startup. So that was how that kind of went. This time was a little bit different. It wasn't so much about learning anymore, but just, again, opportunity cost. If I don't quit my job, this company just won't grow as quickly as it could. So that was that. And, you can go all in on something too early. And it's sort of like, okay, whether you add, 50 hours a week or 10 hours a week to the thing, it's like maybe just not ready. Maybe you have no customers waiting on features. You're really just doing cold outreach. 10 versus 50 hours of cold outreach, I don't know if there's much of a difference. But if you have customers waiting on features, you have customers already paying you, that makes the decision a little bit easier. And so I think, all those things kind of factor in.
And what's the that biggest change that you've noticed since leaving your job to run a startup? Because obviously you can still do things whilst you have a job, and a lot of people bootstrap their startup on the side of having a job, and they make great success. But what are the things that you have realized now that you've got full-time in startup? What is it?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question, because I was recently reflecting on this, and I think the answer might surprise people, maybe it won't. So doing 3 hours a day on a startup, and then maybe 4 or 5 hours each day of the weekend, on paper that looks like 30-ish hours. That should be enough to run a company, right? But it's not. I would say, when I was doing 30 hours a week, I felt like we were making progress every week, because we were. Making one step every week or a couple steps every week is fine. However, a few things sort of factor into why there is actual difference. One is you have competitors. There's certainly, if one team is moving faster than the other, you might just get left behind. And that's not to say that you can't still win part of the market if you have competitors, but especially a startup like ours. If you're working on anything sort of, even reasonably novel, you want that kind of head start. There's a difference there. But second, 30 hours a week versus 60 hours a week is everything. When you have customers waiting on features, when you have momentum, you don't want to be sort of, what do you call it? Just kind of like hamstrung by, this full-time job you have to work. When, your best hours of the day you're spending on somebody else's problems. Yeah. You're definitionally not spending your best hours of the day on your problems. Yeah. So yeah, now I'm in a really good spot where this 60 hours I'm spending, I feel like I'm getting 4 times more. It's not just like double. It's like it's like many multiples, maybe even sort of like an order of magnitude more, I guess, output.
When would be a bad time to quit your job? Let's say you're working on something on the side. When's a bad time? When should you quit?
Yeah. No, this is good. So as I've gotten older, I've realized that startups are not that complicated. Obviously they're really difficult and there's a steep learning curve, and you don't really, it's hard to find a mentor as a founder because like you're your own boss. Obviously you have investors and advisors, but that's almost more noise than less at times. But I think the wrong time to quit is when you have no traction at the sort of fundamentals level. So if you've done trading, there's sort of like fundamentals to look for. And it's kind of no different in startups. It's like, okay, how many users do you have? What's your sort of growth month over month or week over week? Do you have revenue yet? Can you have more revenue if you had more time? If the answer to those is like all bad, it might not be time. If you're early days building a product and you're really excited about it, but you haven't launched yet, you have no idea how to even get users, you might quit and find yourself, wishing you were employed a month later when you're like, what do I do with all this time? I don't even know how to use this time. Yeah. Like I work out of an incubator quite often, and, most people in there are like, hustling, they're working on stuff, but there are a few people that I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but it feels like they're just playing founder. They like the idea of calling themselves a founder, but they're not, they're not actually building a business. They're just building a product that they think is fun to work on. So if you're in that sort of first camp where you're just building a fun product, but you don't know how to build a business around it, I would spend, a few months learning how to build a business, because startups are ultimately businesses. They're not products. Yeah. So you need to know how to grow it. You need to know how to retain users and extract money from those users. You don't just need to build something. So if you're just building and you're having fun, but you don't have the business side figured out yet, it might be too early.
That playing founder is something that I noticed a lot. So I met, for those listening, I met Jack in SF at the incubator. And whilst I was in SF, I realized that as much as there's these like top 10% or top like 5% or 1% of founders out there coming to SF, there's also, on the opposite scale, there's a lot of people playing founder and going to SF because it's the place to be, and then just ending up playing founder. And that's not to say that your product or your idea or whatever is not going to work out. It's like what you're saying, Jack, it's you just need a little bit more time. You need to put those things into place to start making the money, start making the revenue. But so now you're full-time on your startup. What are some of the biggest differences that you've noticed from working for yourself compared to working for someone?
Yeah, this is I almost feel bad answering this because my old bosses might listen to this. I don't know, maybe not. You're just never gonna care as much about somebody else's dream as your own, right? I've almost thought about, like, when I hire my first 10 employees, I want them all to own like a whole percentage of the company. I don't want them to own like 0.25% or 0.025%. Like, dude, I don't know. They're not going to give a shit. There's no reason for them to give a shit. It's so like, I don't know. I've worked at companies before where, yeah, you own like a small fraction of a percent, and you're just like, okay, this is basically just a salary. There's no upside if I put in a weekend. There's no upside if I work to 7 or 8 p.m. And so you just find yourself doing exactly what you need to sort of not get fired. Yeah. And I don't think it's at a conscious level. I think it's a subconscious level. But you're like, okay, yeah, it's like, it's 5 p.m. I did, what I set out to do today. I'm going to go home. Versus working for yourself, it could not be different. It's like, I wake up in the morning, the first thing I do, and it's not like out of stress or out of like fear. It's like, I'm excited. I like check my email. I check my messages. Okay, did anyone, we have like 10 different sort of like customer channels. Did anyone message anything? Do I need to respond to something? My brother's in Japan right now. He had this trip, planned 3 months ago. So he's like, all right, I guess I got to go. But like, he's doing the same thing. Like he's traveling around Japan, but he's like excited. You see the enthusiasm. It's sort of undeniable. There's enthusiasm when you're building your own thing and you believe in it. Yeah. And I was walking with my buddy last night. We're both, founders kind of in a similar stage. And it's a little bit delusional to think about like the cool, the exit, but that's why you do it, right? I mean, you do it because you fundamentally want to change your life, and you pick the hardest problems you can and you try to go solve them, because, you want to change your life. And those things are incredibly motivating. It's truly night and day when, working a day job. Maybe if you're in banking or something where you're like, okay, I have a bonus, a 6-figure bonus attached to this decision. Maybe it's worth it then. But if you're working for someone else and you don't have a significant equity stake, it's like doing chores. Honestly, it's like, I don't even know. I don't have an analogy here.
Sometimes it's good to be delusional. It's something I've realized. Shifting focus, dealing with your previous startup, and you obviously took a leap and you left the job, and the startup, I don't know, it didn't work out, or you stopped working on it.
Yeah.
How did it feel? Like, how did you deal with that?
Oh man. Yeah, that was crazy. Like, I think, a buddy tweeted something yesterday that I've kind of said similar things in the past. I think you kind of need to have some failures under your belt before you sort of like arrive. I think like, you can tell which founders haven't failed yet. You can kind of just tell which people haven't failed yet. And that, the rose-colored glasses, they shatter in an instant. So, when you're working on your startup, even if it's not going well, it feels, we talked about this earlier. It feels good to call yourself a founder. Even if you're failing, it's like, oh, but at least you get the status of being someone who like, signals to the world, like, I'm doing a really hard thing. However, waking up every day and getting kicked in the teeth, like taking an L every single day for years, it's hard to put that into words. And I think that was the experience. Truly, like, my self-esteem disappeared towards the end there. And it was like, okay, can I do a full pivot one more time? And the answer, it actually ended up being no. It was just one of those things where it was like, okay, like, we tried 2 really big swings. Yeah, both of them missed. And at some point it was like, okay, I had all these things, I'm like 27 at this time. I have all these things I put on the back burner in life. I'm making like $70K a year in San Francisco. It's terrible. Yeah. You're just like, okay, maybe it's time. Maybe the status I get from being a founder is not worth me waking up miserable every day. So that was really hard.
And then at the time, how long was there a period where you needed to bounce back in a way? Did you find it tough to get back out there and actually go get the job, or like, how did it generally feel?
So yeah, I mean, some of this was out of my hands, some of it was in my hands. It was tough, like, coming back from being a startup founder, especially a failed startup founder and a young startup founder who didn't, we didn't get the sort of boost where you fail upward. A lot of the time you can fail upward. I think this time, if we fail, I will fail upward because I've built the skills. I'm sort of like figuring out the social media thing. I'm building a really good network. But that time was not the case. I like failed, and it actually looked like I just, coming back to it, was just playing founder for a year and was just an idiot or something. So that was tough. Like, it was tough to find a job. It was tough to sort of build up my identity again, because I didn't know who I was. I'd spent like 4 or 5 years building companies, 3 moonlighting, and the 2 kind of all in. And I had nothing to show for it. And I was like, okay, did I just screw up my whole life? Should I have just been working at Fang? Like, I don't know. So that was tough. It was really tough. Obviously it worked out. I got a good job at a seed stage company. And, over that period, everything that I failed at, when I was leading Chef Studios with my brother, I was able to sort of get paid, 6 figures to get right again, because I joined a small startup and we did the thing. So it all worked out. I think all's well that ends well, right? But at the time, yeah, it was scary. It was like, holy shit, what am I going to do?
Was there a sense of relief joining a company?
Yes, 100%. I think, when you wake up every day, you're you. You don't get to ever get a break from being you. So life sort of progressively can get worse on you, and you don't really realize it. It's like it's the same way of getting in shape or out of shape. You could accidentally gain 10 pounds over 3 months, and you don't really realize it because you're not seeing the before and after. You're seeing that every day. And that's how it was with Chef. So with Chef Studios was the name of the company. Every day I was waking up and I was a little more miserable. It was like, okay, like, I don't think 3 months ago Jack woke up feeling like he didn't want to get out of bed. That's not normal. But when it happens slowly, you feel like, maybe this is just a bad day or whatever. But you have like 30 bad days in a row and you realize, okay, I'm depressed. I think that's what's going on here. So when we shut down, I kind of knew for like 2 or 3 months, like I was done. It was just like, I didn't have another swing in me. The writing was on the wall that, like, we were running out of money. There wasn't like a market opportunity we saw. So when we finally shut down, it was a huge relief.
Yeah. It's sometimes people think that a company that shuts down, the founders are like distraught and everything. But what they don't realize is, if you're a founder, it's happening. Majority of the time, it's coming. It's not like there's a big crash or like Silicon Valley Bank disappears. Like, how often does something like that happen? Most of the time as a founder, you got that inkling. So going into a job and having that relief shows that, like, it's just because you're doing a startup, it's not sexy to do a startup. It's actually the complete opposite of doing
100%.
of running a startup, right? If you want a happy, easy life, go and join a big company and go and get a lot of money. So how, from taking those learnings in the past, how are you thinking about it today with this company? And is there anything worrying you about, let's say, touch wood, 6 months down the line, you either decide to pivot or the company doesn't work out how you expected? Like, is there a worry in your mind, or how are you like negating that so you can actually focus on building?
It's a great question. So yeah, kind of 2 parts of it. It sounds like, what am I doing this time, and what happens if things go to shit? So this time's a little bit different because we really made sure the fundamentals were good before we went all in. Coming back to the when do you quit decision, we had answered the when do we quit decision. We had sort of like done our homework. We'd sat down, we thought, okay, what revenue do we need to quit? How many customers in the funnel do we need to quit? And so when I quit my job, there was never a moment where I thought, what next? There was never a, will this work out? It's sort of like I had to see a clear path to victory before I went for it. And maybe that's a little too cautious. Maybe you don't need to be, so sure of where you're going. Maybe you just need to have some inkling of that. But yeah, this time it was like, okay, I'm very confident in my ability to grow a company. I'm very confident in my ability to build a product. And I'm very confident that the thing that I'm working on right now is something where if my effort is put into it, it will kind of get where I expect it to get. So that's how I'm thinking about it now, which is, maybe there's some delusion in there. I think like delusion is a little bit part of why you start a company. You got to be a little bit crazy. But yeah, I wouldn't fully go all in on something until you kind of like feel like there's a chance you can win.
Yeah.
And that's how I've been thinking about it this time. And yeah, should fortunes reverse, should I just be totally wrong? One, I know, last time it worked out just fine. I'd say your life is better in literally every single way when you're working for somebody else for a real salary. The only thing is that, the what ifs, sometimes you think, oh, it'd be cool if I started another thing, which is ultimately how you end up starting a thing. But if things go south, and it is what it is, we're being very responsible with how much we're raising. We're being responsible with how quickly we're growing. Like I'm on purpose not doing growth this next couple of weeks because we have a lot of features to build, and I'd rather grow at a pace that we can keep up with and we can sort of prove the fundamentals of the business rather than just sort of like get as many people in the funnel, disappoint 90% of them, and then, have to go from there, basically.
Yeah. You're speaking exactly how a second-time founder speaks. Like, super true. How do you deal with age being in San Francisco? Because when I went to San Francisco, I was there for a month, and I'm 25 for context.
Okay.
I felt like I was a granddad. I'm surrounded by like all these people, and not even just on Twitter, but like in person, like, or on, like we see so many YouTubers or Twitters, like 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds, these 16-year-olds who dropped out of Harvard or something. Like one of my closest friends I met whilst I was in SF, and I met him on the first night. He was like the youngest person in South Asia to complete his master's or something. And I'm like, I got home very quickly. So you're a little bit older than me. So how do you deal with that?
No, it's funny. Let's see. I've got a few answers to this. Being 30, and my brother's about to be 34, so we're old. If you're granddad, we're great granddad. I feel like I spent, when I started this journey when I was 24 or whatever. Yeah, I was here, and then I don't know if this is going to come across mirrored or whatever on the screen, but when you start a company and you have your first L, you rock bottom immediately. You're like, oh my God, I don't know anything about being a founder. However, that all sort of gets reconciled by you climbing the curve again. So now that I'm 30, as I mentioned before, startups are not this crazy black box to me. It's actually like any game. Once you learn the rules, you can win. And I've spent 4 or 5 years learning the rules. And yes, I look around at the 23-year-olds, and sometimes they do. Sometimes they hit the jackpot with the right product and the right timing and the right investor they talk to. But I've seen more often than not, I would say 90+% of the time, those first time really young founders have yet to be humbled. And as soon as that happens, which it happens to pretty much everybody, you remember that, being 30 and having some wisdom ain't so bad.
Awesome. So to finish off, what's one piece of advice you would give to your younger self before starting out again?
Yeah, I think if I had one piece of advice, I think actually pretty much everyone could probably benefit from this is learn how to grow a business before you start a business. I think like startups are a business.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, good luck and chat to you later.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Cheers.